Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the age of imperialism. Now, if you remember the other day, we started with this warm up. And so, to answer the burning question about why would European countries want to control Africa, well, it's simple. And most of you hit the nail on the head when you said their natural resources. You were right. Okay. And why? Why do they want natural resources from Africa? Well, first of all, we can look at this map and we know for this third question, second question, we know that America is smaller than Africa. All right. We know that probably at least three USAs, if not more, could possibly fit into Africa. All right. And when we look at this map, we can see that about 11 or more countries fit into Africa. Whatever countries they are, they fit into the continent of Africa. So the continent of Africa was vast. It was big and it had a lot of natural resources. And remember, natural resources being things that naturally occur in the landscape, okay, of Africa. One of the things that we talked about were diamonds. Okay, diamonds are naturally mined mainly in the Congo area, which is right in this area, okay, but in the Congo area of Africa, and that is a huge money-making thing for throughout the world right now. But in the 1800s, all these different European countries were trying to get into Africa to exploit it for all of its different natural resources, which would help them when with their factories, because remember, all these European nations are industrialized. They have factories that need to make finished products. But to make a finished product, you have to start with a natural resource. And where better to go and grab it than in Africa, all right? Because it had a lot of natural resources. So again, we're talking about the age of imperialism. So you're going to want to make sure you label your notes the age of imperialism. The other thing I want to tell you is that as you guys go through this presentation, pause it if you need to. Rewind it if you need to. Don't you dare fast forward me. Just kidding. But please make sure that you guys are getting everything that you guys need to from this. Write down any questions that you have and make sure that you send them to me so we can discuss them in class. So first we have to define imperialism. So what is it? Well, this is when it's the conquering of foreign territories by powerful countries for natural resources and markets. So, in other words, really, if you want to think about it and try and put it into a modern day context, all right, sometimes you have more powerful people, all right? Power can either be money, it could be size of the person, it could be attitude, it could be anything, right? So, people sometimes can bully other people to get what they want. So I want you to think about somebody, let's say there's a smaller kid, he's kind of quiet, he sticks to himself, and there's a bigger kid who for some reason, I don't know, he doesn't like this kid. Or it's not even that he doesn't like him, it's just he knows that he can get something from him. And what he wants is this kid's lunch money. So the bigger kid, all right, is going to bully the little kid, and he's going to get his lunch money every day so that he can buy extra snacks for himself, leaving the little kid with nothing, no lunch, and he's just left there. That, in essence, is what imperialism is, because you have these more powerful countries, and what makes them more powerful, all right, than some of the other nations are the weapons that they have. All right, so they're going to, and they're going to come in to these countries which may not be as powerful, and they are going to exploit them, which means that they are going to use them for their natural resources and markets. That is what imperialism is. It's basically the big bully countries going after weaker countries, usually weaker, not in smarts, not intelligence, nothing like that, but because they don't have weaponry. And they're going to be overpowered by these more powerful nations. So there's different forms of imperialism. The first one here would be a colony. Now, when you talk about colonization, I want you to think about our colonies here in the United States, okay? So that's the first thing I want you to think of. We were actually okay, under imperialism to a certain extent, all right, the Native Americans of this country who lived here, when people came from England and when they came from France and when they came from Spain and from Europe. And think about our earliest colonies at Jamestown, all right? Uh, there you have 1607 in Jamestown, right? And what they do is they come and they live in this country from another nation. So a colony, all right, is when another country, a foreign power, comes into a country that's weaker and they rule directly and they colonize that area. So, in other words, in Africa, a good example of this would be South Africa. The British came in. Now, the first people who were there were the Dutch, but we're not going to get into that. But what ends up happening is that the British end up getting South Africa and they actually bring people over from Great Britain to live in South Africa. That's a colony. It's ruled directly by a foreign power because the foreign power is bringing its people over to live there. Okay, to live in South Africa, to live in this foreign land. All right, and that is a colony. It's ruled directly by people from Great Britain living right there. Now, it could be any country. So I just want to put that out there. It's not just Great Britain, but I use that as an example. Now, a protectorate is a little bit different. A protectorate would be when a foreign power controls another country that is not their own. But they don't have people living there. They did not colonize the area. They just have it as a protectorate. So they put local people in charge who are going to do what they want them to do. They kind of act as puppets, so to speak. And so let's say that the French, all right, let's say that they hold an area in Africa and they don't colonize it. They don't send their people to live there, but they get people who are native to the land to do their bidding. So they tell them, this is what we want to have happen, and it's done. So it's a protectorate. There aren't people from the nation, the foreign power controlling this nation, controlling parts of Africa who live there. They just control it from afar. Also, foreign powers had what were called spheres of influence. So that meant that even though they may not colonize an area, even though they may not be controlling an area, they may have a sphere of influence in that area. So, in other words, they might have exclusive rights to different places that are near some of their colonies. Okay, so they are very influential in one area or another. Now, before imperialism, in Africa, you guys actually have already done those digital worksheets on this, looking at the empires of Africa. So something that we do know is that Africa was not what the Europeans thought. They believed that it was uncivilized. They believed that there was no culture there, and they believed that basically, hey, we're doing you Africans a favor by coming in and helping you out here. But that wasn't true. There were many amazing African civilizations. As a matter of fact, in Africa, there were over 1,000 languages and 1,000 different groups who lived in Africa. And the Europeans didn't care. They believed that these people were just run amok, all right, because, they did not live like Europeans lived. Now, for a very long time, Africans in Africa managed to keep Europeans out of the continent for 400 plus years. Africa was along a trade route called the Silk Road, and where people would come from out here, way off the map, from China with silk and goods, and from India, which was lower down here, and they would travel up in this region. Okay, this is Egypt up here, just so you guys know. Over here would be Morocco. So all of these northern African kingdoms up here, they would travel in these areas with spices and goods and then travel on to Europe. But this area up here was well traveled. However, the Sahara Desert is right here. And below it, Okay. Many Europeans never went into the interior of Africa. They mainly hugged the coast. All right. So it was easier to be out here on the coast than it was to try and get into the interior of Africa. As a matter of fact, the only people who went inside of Africa and left the coast were missionaries who would explore the interior. Missionaries are people usually from the Catholic Church, although other churches were also represented, other forms of Christianity. And they would come in and they would try and convert the native Africans to Christianity. And they believed that they were actually doing them a favor. So this leads us to talking about the Belgian Congo because it is actually on the interior. Okay. It's in this area here, it's in the interior of Africa. And King Leopold of Belgium is going to hire an explorer named David Stanley to explore the Belgian Congo, and he wanted him to claim the Congo for Belgium. So, what David Stanley does is that he goes about and he finds these local chiefs in along the Congo River and he says to them, "Hey guys, I'm going to promise you this and this and this and this if you'll allow us to come in and do this and this and this and this." Okay? So, of course, the Congo chiefs, not knowing any better, they made deals. All right. At that point, nobody's coming in to fight them. Nobody's coming in to, really challenge them to anything. What they're doing is just asking them for a treaty. All right. And the African chieftains are kind of like, well, hey, okay, we have honor, we have integrity. You gave us your word, you're going to do this. We'll give you our word, we're going to do that. But this is not what actually ends up happening. These European countries, primarily from Belgium, are going to brutally exploit the Africans to collect rubber. Now, you might say, rubber, wait a minute, that has to be manufactured and produced, and you're right. Rubber actually is made from, I should say this, trees. The trees have a sap. The sap that comes off of the trees is then mixed and mixed and mixed and mixed, and it eventually is made into rubber. So this is what the Belgians wanted. They wanted rubber. They wanted to get their hands on what they could in the Congo. And in the Congo, all right, it was lot of rubber trees. You're also going to see this happen in Vietnam, but the French are the ones who are going to be exploiting the Vietnamese up until about the 1950s, but we'll talk about that later. Other countries are going to start to take note, okay, of what Belgium has done. And here is the Belgian Congo right here, okay? It's in this area right here. And they're taking all of this rubber from these rubber trees, and they are going to take it, they're going to manufacture it, and they are going to make a lot of money. So other countries start to take note of Africa's natural resources. They start to realize that there's not just things out along the coastline, but there's a lot of goods to be had within the interior of Africa. So now it won't only be the missionaries who are going to go into the interior of Africa, it's also going to be basically everybody else. So this starts what is known as the scramble for Africa. If you look at this political cartoon right here, you'll see Russian grab bag, British grab bag, Germany grab bag, right? And they're all like reaching up there, except the British at that moment, but you can see them reaching up just like they're taking a piece of the globe off and they're going to put it into their bag. So in this sense, okay, it's showing you that all these different countries, all these British countries, all these European countries, Asian countries, Eurasian, I should say country, because that's what Russia is, that they are in a scramble for Africa. So what starts to happen is more and more countries from Europe start to come into Africa and try to take over certain areas. They realize that this could become a problem, that it could cause a war over claims that they have. So there were 14 European nations that in 1884 to 1885 are going to meet in Berlin, Germany. They call this meeting the Berlin Conference. And it's at this conference that the European nations, 14 of them, divide Africa up without any regard for the people there. As a matter of fact, they say, and it's a quote from there, that they all wanted a piece of this great, magnificent African cake. Okay? Think about that. They're taking a whole continent with people who live there, who have civilization, who have their own tribes. You saw 1,000 different languages, 1,000 different groups living there. And they are going to take Africa and divide it how they want amongst these 14 European nations. Wow. Let that sink in for a minute. They don't ask the people who live there. They split up tribes, or they put, different groups, different tribes together who actually usually were warring tribes. But they say, well, now this is all of Belgium's area, or this is all British's area, and this is Germany's area. And now you guys are just going to have to live together. We don't care what your, barriers were before, which, you had this territory, they had that territory. They basically take away what it means to be an African. So kind of let that sink in. It's not just in Africa that this happens. There's other areas in the world that it happens, but this is huge. And when you're talking about the scramble for Africa here, you're talking post-slavery, because this is 1884. So slavery has already ended. All right. It's over at this point. And Africa now is just being discovered not for its natural resource of people to exploit, which was bad enough, horrible enough, but now they're exploiting it for its natural resources, okay, more of them. And now they're not just taking people out of Africa, they're actually taking Africa away from the people, okay? Just let that sink in. All right. So after the Berlin Conference, you are only going to have two areas, two countries, okay, which are not taken over by the British, or by the Europeans. I keep saying the British because the British are going to control a lot of territory everywhere. So sorry about that. But all these different European nations, if you look at the key here, you can see colonial rule in Africa. The colors coordinate, all right, with who got what area. Now, there's only two nations, and make sure you write this down. There are only two nations which remain independent. These two nations are Ethiopia, and Ethiopia remained independent because they fight. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but they fight for their independence. Over here, Liberia on the west coast of Africa is also going to remain independent, mainly because of the fact that it was an area that had been designated by the United States to try and extradite former slaves from the United States who were now free, okay, back to Africa. So one of the things that people do not realize is that, and you don't have to write this down, the only thing I want you to write down from here is two nations, Ethiopia and Liberia. They were the only two that remained independent, okay, after the Berlin Conference in 1884-85. But what I want you to know about Liberia, a lot of people don't know this, but President Lincoln, while he was a great champion to end slavery, he did not believe in slavery, but he also didn't believe in equality. So what he wanted to do, he had this great idea of extradition. And there was not really a great idea, but there was this idea that, well, we'll just send all the former slaves back to Africa. They came from Africa, so let's send them back to Africa. Well, there's a problem there. Okay. You've had slaves in the United States for many, many generations. And the slave trading, bringing new Africans over to anywhere, the United States, the Caribbean, anywhere, was outlawed after about 1807. It still went on. I want you to know that. But not as in as large quantities as it had before. So there weren't a whole lot of new people coming in from Africa into slavery. There were slaves that were already in America who were having children. And so there were generations and generations of slaves who were no longer African. They'd never seen Africa because they'd been born on American soil. So this idea of sending them back to Africa, to Liberia, bad idea. And actually they sent a test group of 2,000 former slaves back to Africa. They send them to Liberia and expect them to just be African. But the problem is, and how just ridiculous is it? How are they supposed to be African when all they know is how to be American? They had never lived in Africa. Okay, so that failed miserably, just so you guys know. But in this instance, this is the reason why Liberia was independent, because it had been set aside to be an area of extradition for former slaves from the United States. So, the white man's burden. Yeah, right. Okay. The white man's burden in this, okay? And if you look at this political cartoon, all right, so we've got Uncle Sam over here. We've got a British guy over here, right? And we have up here civilization. Okay, if you look up there. So you see things down here: vice, ignorance, barbarism, oppression, superstition, slavery, cruelty. Ah, I can't see that. Vice. There we go. Cannibalism, ignorance. So basically, what it's showing you here is that the white men, right, are taking all of, you see here, Cuba, okay, they're taking all of these natives from other areas. Here you see India, this would be China. Okay, so you're seeing all these people being carried on the backs of the white men, okay, going up all these different stones, okay, which are all these things which they believed that the natives in different areas possessed, so that they can lead them. The white man can bring all these different groups to civilization. So the white man's burden is tied to a guy named Rudyard Kipling, who wrote a poem in 1899. And his main thing was he wanted the United States to join the burden on empire of empire. And it was about this time that the United States was acquiring Puerto Rico, Guam, Cuba, and the Philippines. So that was in 1899, and Rudyard Kipling was urging the United States to, be a part of this imperialist game. So Europeans and Americans at this point believed it was their responsibility to do a couple things for these people, as you can see from this political cartoon. They believed that natives in these different countries needed to be Christianized. Okay, because at this time you were not civilized if you were not a Christian. All right, so they wanted to spread Christianity and bring the word of God to these natives, many of whom already had their own rich traditions and rich religions that they believed in and that they followed. But yet here we have these guys going, no, it's not enough. Okay, we need to spread Christianity. Also, the white man's burden, according to Rudyard Kipling, amongst other things, was to civilize and educate other nations. So, unless you were European and you were Christian, or American and Christian, basically, unless you were white and Christian, you pretty much weren't civilized according to the European nations or Americans, okay? So it was believed that the white man's burden was to make sure that you civilized all these poor native peoples, all right? And I'm saying that sarcastically, all right? And to educate them and to spread Christianity to them so that they could be civilized. But again, they already had great civilization. They were civilized. This is called ethnocentrism. Okay, and we'll talk about this in class, but ethnocentrism means that you believe that your ethnicity, or you believe that your group of people, like United States, right? If we're ethnocentric, which we are, we believe that the United States, that America is the greatest nation. Nobody can challenge us. Nobody can say anything, and everybody else is trash. Okay, like everybody else is just trash. Like we're amazing. Like, don't mess with the US, okay? Because we're ethnocentric. It means you believe that your nation is the best, your people are the best, and nobody can compare to you. And so the white man's burden was built on this idea of ethnocentrism, and we'll talk about that. And I'll make sure and we'll pull your notes out so we can write that word down. So even though, okay, 1884, we have this, the conference that takes place in Africa is all carved up. There's going to be some conflict in Africa over these things. Shaka, I just love Shaka Zulu. So Shaka led the Zulus against the British rule in the early 1800s. Eventually, he was defeated, but he did lead a hard fight against the British, and the British were very surprised. The Boer War was fought between Dutch settlers and the British in South Africa in the 1890s. The British wanted control of South Africa, and as you know from me talking before, they did win that control. So they actually get control of South Africa. Emperor Menelik II, however, did successfully defeat Ethiopia against invasion in 1896. And that would be why you saw on that map a while back only two nations remained independent of European rule. And that was Liberia, and I explained why, and Ethiopia. And this was because Emperor Menelik II, he defended Ethiopia against invasion, and he actually kept Ethiopia free, which was very, very good for the people. So we are going to stop there in talking about imperialism in Africa. During the next lecture, we'll be talking about imperialism in Asia and also about imperialism on the part of the Americans and what the Americans do. And we're going to stop there for today. So please make sure that you guys write down any questions that you guys might have about imperialism in Africa. If you were confused about anything in this, try rewinding and going back and trying to see if you can make any sense of what it is that I was trying to say. But if you have an issue, in your notes, what I would suggest to do in a different color pen, or just like next to your notes, like put like a little, squiggly, and inside the squiggly, write down your question so that you can ask me in class. And if you're worried about asking it in class, send it to me ahead of time and I'll make sure to address it. All right. Have a great day, evening, whatever, and talk to you soon.